Hi everybody, Clark Smith here. I thought I'd make this video to explain the personal journey that led me to this goofy WineSmith project and what you can expect from us. The foundation of our brand is total honesty and transparency. I'm never going to do anything that I don't want to brag about, and so I hope in this session that there'll be lots of questions. I'm going to tell you right now that my wines are highly manipulated. All wines are highly manipulated. Those are not grapes in the glass. And no wine is as manipulated as any beer. And that's the truth. So let's get rid of the M word because it has two meanings. One is artisanality, doing things with our hands. That's a good thing, I think, in everybody's mind. But the other is this sort of artful deceit. And that's pretty insulting to winemakers. If you want winemakers to tell you the truth, don't insult them. Don't make them afraid to tell you the truth. I want to invite all of you to have an open, honest listening, and then winemakers will tell you what they really do instead of what the marketing department tells them to say. I think winemaking is just cooking. It's the ultimate slow food. It takes a long time to make a wine. We're going to look at some wines here that took decades to make. And I think winemakers should be like top chefs. I love it when Wolfgang Puck gets on TV and talks about, well, I've got this gooey brie here and I want to grate it, so I'm going to freeze it with liquid nitrogen. You want to watch? Or, puff technology or sous vide. Those are great ideas. And there's a lot of great ideas in winemaking that are being performed covertly because they haven't been explained to writers and sommeliers, masters of wine, let alone the general public. And I think you guys can probably smell it, that we're really not being truthful with you. I'm going to be truthful with you. Let's see whether or not you can handle the truth. Okay? I'm counting on you. All right. So I want to share with you the understanding of wine that I derive from my 58 vintages. That's 44 in the northern hemisphere and 14 in the southern hemisphere. And I've developed a notion of what wine is and how we can play with it that led me to this book. This is called Postmodern Winemaking, and it was the 2013 Book of the Year. It's a pretty technical book, really written to other winemakers, but I think also anybody that's really done their homework in the trade, any good sommelier or master of wine or WSET graduates should be able to grasp the basic principles that I'm laying out in the first half of the book, and the rest of it is pretty easy sledding. So I hope you'll give it a look, and I want to explain how I got there and what my manifestation of postmodern winemaking is. Postmodern winemaking can be a lot of different things. It's really some kind of reaction to modern winemaking in the same way that postmodern art is a reaction to modern art. Here's my personal journey that kind of led me there. I grew up on the East Coast. I spent my beaver cleaver years in Westfield, New Jersey, which is where I got my attitude. I'm not quite as mellow as your typical Californian. So my dad was literally a rocket scientist, and we were down in Daytona Beach, Florida in 1962 preparing for the Apollo shot. And I ended up in a private school in the South where I really learned how to write. And then I went to MIT in 1970. And I stayed there for 2 years, and my problem was there were so many cool things going on then that I couldn't declare a major. So I wandered out to California and got a job in a wine shop and spent 5 years there learning about mostly European wines. That's when California wines were just beginning to emerge. And I developed a European aesthetic, wines with balance and integrity and longevity, wines that could age a good long time. And to this day, I feel that I'm betraying a customer if I don't give them a wine that can last a long time. Often decades, but also lasts a long time after you open it. Most of my wines, you can leave them open for at least a week and they'll still be fine. And in fact, may improve. So you can expect flat aging trajectories from my wines, and that means that they might not come bursting out of the bottle. I don't like to make impactful wines that knock your socks off. I assure you, you'll be fully clothed throughout the tasting experience, but my hope is that you'll be sorry when it's all gone. I never release anything that isn't ready to go, which sometimes means 5 to 10 years in very old French oak, but most of them will still go another decade or better in a good cellar. And that also means that they do very well once they've been opened, so you don't have to drink the whole darn bottle the first day. My wines don't fall apart, and usually will go a week or better, and not only hold up, but sometimes improve. Pretty flat aging trajectories. So in 1976, I made my first wine. It was a Clarksburg Cabernet in my basement in Oakland. And then in 77, I joined Vidercrest and ran the cellar there for 3 years. And then, so this is 9 years after I dropped out of MIT, I went to UC Davis and learned the gospel according to Roger Bolton and Ann Noble, and did the bachelor's program and the master's program, although to my shame I never turned in my thesis, so I don't actually have a master's yet. And then I built R.H. Phillips with the Jaguar family starting in 1983. I left to hang out my shingle as WineSmith Consulting. I spent a stint with the Benzigers where we were doing some international blending, and that's when I met and befriended Pascal Ribeiro-Gayon, who was running the University of Bordeaux Faculty of Enology, and we did a project together called Imagery Claret. And at the same time, the Benzigers put me in charge of a non-alcoholic wine project, which never really got off the ground, but it did acquaint me with reverse osmosis. Now, Pascal, in tasting California fruit, said, well, your flavors just aren't mature. You should let the grapes hang longer. You can get the kind of flavor development at high bricks that we get at what we get at 21 bricks. You might have to go to 25 or 26, but your problem is then the wines will have too much alcohol, and so you can't make graceful wines like we can in Bordeaux. And I'm going, well, Pascal, you're chaptalizing from 21 to 23 to get balance. We just need to figure out a way to take our alcohol out so that we can get proper maturity and then balance the wines. And so I put those two things together and developed a process using reverse osmosis that could give us any alcohol that we wanted without harming the wine, and that sort of went global. Another embodiment of the patent was the ability to take out volatile acidity, and so we were able to establish a company called Vinovation that went global and became, with its partners, the largest wine consulting company in the world, and we did service for thousands and thousands of wineries all over the world. And that attracted some people like Patrick Ducournau at Inodev that was studying wine structure and oak alternatives, and particularly microbrûlage, micro-oxygenation, and other ways to bring intentional, minute amounts of enological oxygen. And I spent quite a bit of time in France studying that technique. Now, the WineSmith wines got started in 1993, making Cabernet Franc and Sangiovese, and they were only sold in Manhattan and Brooklyn. And in 1999, I started applying my learning in Inodev and putting together the pieces of a sort of technical cooking school, which eventually led, after I got it all kind of pulled together, to the publication of Postmodern Winemaking 13 years later. When I left R.H. Phillips in 1990, I had made a whole lot of really good white wine using the modern enological methods that I learned at Davis. But my reds were terrible. And I couldn't figure out why. I didn't know what to do. They were just awful. And there were so many really soulful, integrated wines with great texture coming out of Australia, coming out of France. And I wanted to know how that happened. So I think I could characterize the 90s as a way that I explored how to do that. I didn't really actively explore it. It just all got sort of handed to me in a series of events that led me by the end of the decade with a much better grasp, particularly of wine texture. Before that, I was really just thinking about aromas, and I hope in this, and I hope as we taste through the wines that you'll really concentrate on what's happening in the texture. The texture and the aroma are related through this property called aromatic integration that takes different aromatic elements and blends them together in a way that is simple and soulful. Just like when an orchestra, just like when a conductor, brings all 100 instruments in the symphony together and they all play in a single voice. That's what I'm trying to accomplish. And I think the soul is simple. The soul doesn't like complexity. It likes harmonization. It likes the wine to speak in a single voice. So unfortunately, while all this was going on the wine production side, there was some strange things going on over in the trade side, and I think it's all our fault because nobody has any problem going to a winery and seeing stainless steel and electricity and refrigeration. We think this is all normal, but it's not. If you took a winemaker from the 19th century or any time all the way back to the 8,000 years when we started making wine, they'd walk into a winery, they have no idea that it was a winery, and then when they found out it was, they'd have a heart attack and die. Those are brand new technologies, and they're not necessarily always good. But we're very comfortable with them because we have stainless steel and electricity and refrigeration in our kitchens. And so we're perfectly comfortable with them. But when we start talking about stuff like micro-oxygenation and reverse osmosis and flash détente, they don't know what we're talking about, and they think we may be doing evil to the wine, particularly since we're not openly trying to explain these things. And so that's a lot of my mission, is to try to connect people in the trade who think wine is sacred just as we do and have dedicated their lives when they could have done something that was a lot more lucrative. And yet somehow between winemakers and wine lovers in the trade, there's a disconnect, there's a bad marriage because we're not talking to each other. Postmodern winemaking is really about saying the unsayable, about wine technology, about some of the ridiculous and destructive beliefs of the natural wine movement, about scientific enology, about the way sensory science is done, my views on biodynamics and minerality, which we have no idea what it is. Now the last chapter is about wine and music. And I think that's a very interesting inquiry because wines carry emotion the same way music does. And there are happy wines and there are sad wines. And Cabernet Sauvignon doesn't taste very good with a polka. It needs Beethoven's Fifth, The Doors, something dark and angry, and then it becomes round and sweet and harmonious. And so I'm really interested in this new science of cognitive enology that tries to understand what wine is delivering to us when it's in harmony and what it fails to deliver us if it's unbalanced, or for example if there's TCA and the wine becomes unaccountably astringent when there's just this tiny little bit of mold that screws up this illusion of harmony and sweetness that we strive for. Thanks for your attention, and now let's taste some wine.